Of course the elections will not be rigged. What does that mean? The federal government doesn't run the election process. States and cities and communities all across the country, they're the ones who set up the voting systems and the voting booths. And if Mr. Trump is suggesting that there is a conspiracy theory that is being propagated across the country, including in places like Texas, where typically it's not Democrats who are in charge of voting booths, that's ridiculous. That doesn't make any sense, and I don't think anybody would take that seriously.
Or perhaps more correctly, we have lost a war with Russia without a battle. We are no longer a sovereign nation. We are no longer a democracy. We are no longer a free people. We are the victims of a bloodless coup, so far a bloodless coup, engineered by Russia with at best the traitorous indifference of the Republican Party and Donald John Trump, a man who, to borrow a phrase from another December long ago, will live in infamy. Is that intense enough for you? Well, if anything, our next guest thinks that might be understated. Robert McAlvain is a professor of history at Millsaps College, a columnist also at the Huffington Post, and he's been writing a lot about Russia in recent days, and he joins us now. Professor, thanks for coming on. So,
glad to be with you.
I want to quote something you wrote just a couple days ago that I read in the Huffington Post. You say, and I'm quoting, "There is substantial evidence that Russia stole the election for Donald Trump." What is that evidence that they stole the election?
Well, first of all, I do not go beyond Keith Olbermann. In fact, a lot of that is certainly hyperbole. But when people say that whatever Russia did clearly didn't affect the election, that's ridiculous. We hardly ever hear mentioned in the media that Hillary Clinton won by 2.8 million votes in the real vote. The three states that put Trump over the top in the Electoral College was by a total of a little over 80,000 votes. And if anyone thinks that what the Russians were doing in terms of the emails that were released through WikiLeaks intended to damage Hillary, and they obviously did to a great extent, were not enough to get 80,000 votes moved in the direction of Trump away from Hillary, I don't know what they're thinking. Obviously,
okay, well, but hold on. Let's just, I want to get back to what you wrote. You wrote something very specific. I'm going to read it to you again in case you don't remember writing it. There is substantial evidence that Russia stole the election for Donald Trump. I'm not contesting it was a close election. I'm, of course, familiar with the numbers. How did Russia steal the election? Please be precise.
The way I just said, by doing things that were intended to help him and to hurt Hillary Clinton. I don't think initially that was what the Russians were expecting to happen. They thought, like almost everyone else, including Trump himself, that Hillary would win the election. They were trying to damage her, make it closer, make her weaker. But as it got closer to the end, they saw the possibility of him winning.
But hold on, I don't want to interrupt you, and I don't want to talk over each other, but you're saying, how would you know what the Russians think? Do you have special access to the thinking of Vladimir Putin? How would you know that? And again, for the third time, how did they steal the election? You said they stole the election, and I'm open-minded, but I want to know how they did that specifically.
Well, I think I've just told you twice, and I know you like to argue, but what I'm trying to get at here is the fact that the Russians are going to have enormous influence in a Trump administration, and this is not something that should only bother Democrats or liberals. It's an American issue. It's a patriotic issue.
Okay, but hold on. I'm sorry. You wrote. You're a college professor. You have a real job. You wrote on one of the biggest websites in the world, the Huffington Post, that they stole the election. Now I'm quoting, "The survival of the American Republic is at stake. We have only 10 days to save the Republic from a hostile takeover by billionaire oligarchs and their Russian backers." I want to know how this happened. How specifically did they influence the election? By releasing these emails? Do you have evidence that these emails swayed the election results? If so, what is that evidence? I mean, you made all these claims.
Are you seriously suggesting that the emails did not have an influence on the election? I mean, everyone knows that. It's.
But how does everyone? I mean, everyone. Let's say
Trump would say they didn't. He's the one who kept telling the Russians to go ahead and release them.
Come on. You're making specific claims. You say they stole the election, and I'm not misquoting you. You wrote that like 3 days ago, and I'm asking you how, and you won't answer, and you're instead saying it was a very close election.
I have answered it repeatedly. What I would like to, instead of getting into an argument over that, would like to ask why everyone in the country is not seriously upset not only about the Russian intervention in the election, but the fact that the National Security Advisor is very close to Putin, the incoming Secretary of State is very close to Putin.
Look,
Mr. Trump
we're going to be
himself,
debating that for the rest of the
campaign,
show.
continued to talk about Putin in the most glowing terms. This is crazy. I mean,
Then let me ask you.
Can't imagine if this was on the other in the other direction.
If it was on the other side,
what people like you would be saying. What you'd be saying if Hillary Clinton had been helped by the Russians and
I don't want to keep talking over you.
Russian-favorable people into the government.
I have to say, I would ask the exact same question, which is, if you're going to claim that a foreign government influenced the outcome of elections in this country, be very specific about how they did it. Do you think they altered the count from the voting machines? Do you think a specific piece of propaganda? Okay, then
there
what
is no
specific?
Evidence of that.
Okay, then tell me your evidence.
I told you
You're making me
repeatedly
frustrated.
what they did. What we know they did was to put out the emails.
Please just hear my question.
And incidentally, if you let me talk for just a moment, if you let me talk for just a moment, it's interesting that Mr. Trump focused in on the claim that was in one of the news stories over the weekend that the RNC was also hacked and insisted that wasn't true. Well, let's think about why he would want to insist that. Because if in fact the RNC was hacked and they didn't put anything out.
I have you on to offer evidence to support something that you wrote, and I'm giving you airtime in front of a lot of people.
And I have offered you the evidence of that. What I would like to do is talk about why you and every other American should be concerned about an American government beholden to Vladimir Putin.
I'm concerned enough to have you on, and you are literally the last guest I'm going to ask this of, because I've asked it for the last 5 days, not one person has answered. Name one email or one piece of information that was false that got into the media bloodstream in America that you think was sufficient to influence the election for Donald Trump. Just name one.
Did I say that they were false? No, I didn't say they were false.
Then name a real one and show some evidence that it influenced voter behavior.
For the express purpose of helping Trump.
But name one piece of information from WikiLeaks that you can show influenced voter behavior on a scale sufficient to pull the election for Trump. You can't.
Remember, we just talked about a moment ago a scale sufficient. If you look at the total vote, the number of votes that gave Trump a lead in the electoral college,
I'm going to stop you there. You were saying irresponsible things that are misleading people, and I think it's wrong.
The entire electorate.
Robert, I'm cutting you off because I gave you a chance, and you refused to be real with me, and I'm sorry about that. Thanks for joining us.
I'm sorry.
We knew that ahead of the election, but it never got the attention that I think it should, and so it's pretty soul-crushing to have that come out now and confirm that they were in fact trying to help Donald Trump.
First, it was Jim Comey's fault. Then we're going to have a recount in 3 states, which ended up in an embarrassing mess, millions of dollars spent, and all we did was gain more votes for Donald Trump. And then it was Russian interference.
Well, there you see the campaign managers for the two campaigns talking about all of this talk of Russian interference in the election, hacking, and what impact it has. Now we hear that the House Minority Leader, Nancy Pelosi, wants an independent probe like a 9/11 commission to look into this in addition to congressional hearings on it. Of course, there is some debate in the intelligence community. This is the National Intelligence Director, November 17th, on this very issue.
As far as the WikiLeaks connection, the evidence there is not as strong, and we don't have good insight into the sequencing of the releases or when the data may have been provided.
All right, so where's this going, and what's next? We're back with the panel. Laura.
I think that the interagency squabbling over how much Russia affected the election is kind of, at this point, it's beside the point. It's clear, and I think Kellyanne is right about this. The left, they're hopscotching from excuse to excuse. So they started with Comey, then they said, let's get rid of the Electoral College. Then it was Russia, and then they'll probably move on to something else. We have serious challenges, cybersecurity challenges in the United States. And I think we've had intelligence failure after intelligence failure since 9/11. I mean, we obviously messed up Benghazi. We didn't really foresee the militarization of space that China's doing. We really didn't see what was coming in North Korea. We've missed the overrun at the border and what could be the implication of that. There are a lot of things that we're missing. And on top of it, we're not really ahead of the curve when it comes to hacking into government systems, which has been going on for years and years. Personnel files files. 50 million of them were hacked by the Chinese. And I don't recall Barack Obama or any of the Democrats on Capitol Hill being concerned that China would use the private information, the background checks of millions of government employees, including yours truly, by the way, for any nefarious means. They didn't really make any big deal of that. So now this is the big narrative, because the Electoral College is going to meet next week, and we want to try to delegitimize the Trump victory. This does not surprise me at all. I think they should do an investigation, but come on. I mean, this is now just, you know, pick your excuse except for your policy failures.
In the first weeks after Donald Trump's surprise election win, Democrats tried to make sense of the inexplicable, the unthinkable. How did this man become president? Was it racism? Was it sexism? A rogue FBI? An ungrateful middle class? The long-term effects of OxyContin? Well, none of those explanations answer the question adequately, and so a new culprit was found: theft. The election must have been stolen by Russian saboteurs. The country's editorial pages were in full Russian panic mode this morning.
Not everybody in the spy business sees Russia's digital fingerprints on the outcome. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Harridge sorts it all out for us tonight.
A U.S. government source says the Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, who oversees the 17 intelligence agencies, is not on the same page as CIA Director John Brennan. The issue comes down to the hacker's intent and whether there is strong evidence that Vladimir Putin's government meddled to ensure a Trump victory. The White House spokesman said today Mr. Obama wants the formal assessment public.
That's something that we'll try to do. The president does believe that we should, particularly when it relates to something as central to our democracy as the conduct of a national election.
The timing and targets of the cyber attacks varied widely. The hacks exposed via WikiLeaks emails belonging to the Clinton campaign team and the DNC. Another wave of attacks hit voter registration data from state boards of elections.
We gave considerable thought to diming out Russia with that statement.
DNI Clapper told lawmakers last month that after the U.S. government publicly blamed Russia, the attacks against the state boards dropped off.
I was referring to the cyber reconnaissance that we had observed.
Clapper said the Russian link to WikiLeaks and the Clinton campaign emails was more tenuous when pressed by the committee's senior Democrat.
I want to drill down a little further into your comment that the Russian activity curtailed after the issuance of the statement. The dumping of documents didn't end.
As far as the WikiLeaks connection, the evidence there is not as strong, and we don't have good insight into the sequencing of the releases or when the data may have been provided.
In a letter Monday, the Republican chairman of the House committee, Devin Nunes, asked Clapper to reconcile by Friday media reports that the CIA and FBI have developed conflicting intelligence assessments. A former intelligence officer said discerning Russia's motivation would be challenging.
For email traffic and signals intelligence, you see patterns. What you need to define and find out intent is someone on the inside.
Just people are upset because it feels like a manipulation of the media. Let's not forget what happened a few years ago when the president's mic was hot and he whispered to Medvedev, look, I'll have more flexibility after the election. Your take on the DNC email? Yeah.
This is classical diversionary tactic. I mean, the issue is not who hacked it. The issue is what was in those emails. That's what they don't want to talk about. They don't want to talk about how they rigged the system. So, of course, they're going to concentrate on this. You know, again, I think people should be smarter than that.
The CIA and the FBI examined the exact same data, which was produced for them by the NSA. The CIA's analysts said the Russians were behind this. The FBI's analysts said there's no evidence that the Russians were behind it. But we do know that this was leaking. It was not hacking. Leaking is the unauthorized exposure of something to a person for whom it wasn't intended. Hacking is the altering of an operational system so you get a false result. You can't affect the outcome of the election By hacking Mrs. Clinton or the DNC, you could affect the outcome of the election if you hacked those who register the voters or count the voters.
But can't you affect the election if you hack into the Democrats and release all kinds of nasty stuff about them, but you don't do the same with the Republicans?
Except that there's no evidence that this was done by the Russians. But there is evidence for this. Who was harmed by Mrs. Clinton's extremely careless, Director Comey's words, use of state secrets? Whose agents' lives were jeopardized by her failure to keep these state secrets? The American intelligence community. Okay. And it is more likely than not that members of the American intelligence community leaked this to Julian Assange than that the Russians did.
That is a fascinating suggestion.
Suggestion comes from members of the American intelligence community.
Is that right?
Yes.
You've got some good sources.
But I think the Russians are a big reason, and the idea, what is so fascinating to me is that on the right now, the bottom line is, let's politicize this. If you are for Donald Trump, ignore the Russians, and let it be the Democrats' problems and charges of hypocrisy against them. What hypocrisy? Everybody at this table would agree that ISIS and Islamic terror is a threat to the United States, and that was Obama's point when he was talking to Romney about the Russians. But now it's, oh, the Democrats never said a word about the Russians. How ridiculous is this? Anyway, my point to you is when
Can you just do me a huge favor? Sure. Can you explain, and I'm having a hard time understanding what the left is saying, how did the Russians influence the election by hacking into the DNC and not hacking into
let me see. All those leaked emails that went to Podesta, oh, you think that's a problem? And who
leaked?
Do you think? Yes, leaked by who? And who did the hacking?
Exactly. We don't know who did that.
No, I think 17 intelligence agencies have said this was the Russians, but some people don't want to hear.
Go ahead, KG.
Yeah, listen, I mean, this is, look, nobody's saying don't pay attention and keep a close eye on Russia and make sure, because of course we're very concerned about cybersecurity. We're all very concerned about what's going on with China, with North Korea, and with the Russians in particular. The intelligence agencies have been consistent in keeping a close eye on Russia. This does not discount or explain the historic, catastrophic loss by the Democrats, by Hillary Clinton, for a poor candidate who was hugely corrupt, that had problems from the beginning, that thumbed her nose at the laws, thumbed her nose at the American people, and thought that she was too big to fail. With the Clinton Foundation, with the email servers, with the lies about Benghazi, all of it. That is why she was unelectable, and that is why she got smoked by President-elect Trump.
I find it unbelievable that people seem to forget. This is less than 1% decided in the last week of this election, and there was, you say, oh, terrible candidate, terrible candidate. She was a flawed candidate, but guess what? She got almost 3 million more votes than Donald Trump.
And he got, what, 60 more?
Metropolitan cities like New
more
York.
Electoral college.
Right. I mean, okay, here's the thing. You can't blame the Russians for the fact that we got 30-plus governorships and we've got all these legislatures, we got all these congressmen and senators. Right. So Trump is, in a way, part and parcel of that trend.
The wave.
It's the wave. You can't say, oh, the Russians just helped him and didn't help them. It's the wave that kind of went forward. However, I have to agree with Juan. If you see an elderly woman getting mugged, you know it's wrong. Is it less wrong because you don't like the elderly woman?
Is she getting mugged, or did she take a dive? Did she fall?
I think they tried to mug her
and say, hold on, I just fell. I'm suing this place.
Yeah.
Here's my point. We don't know. There is no definitive proof that whatever the Russians got that they gave to WikiLeaks wasn't leaked.
Eric, you're going to do a Donald Trump on us and say, I ignore all American intelligence. I don't respect American intelligence agencies.
All
American agents are
intelligence does not agree on that.
No, yes, they do.
Absolutely not.
Let me tell you, they agree. And not only that, the idea that you would say to American intelligence people, you know what, I don't even want to read your intelligence briefings. I don't believe you.
No.
That's crazy.
The people that I actually spoke to at the CIA this morning who said this has clearly been politicized to an ideological advantage. It is unfortunate. They're doing their job and being professionals. There is no facts, evidence, substantive evidence to prove that the Russians played a role and influenced the outcome of this election.